Hi and welcome back. Today we're going to learn how to use a graphics program to make images for our games. Because the industry standard, Photoshop, needs a subscription, we're going to use a free image making software online that is very similar to Photoshop called Photopea. So you can get to it by going to photopea.com. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new project. And now we're going to need to figure out the size, the DPI, and the background for our image. So Scratch's default background size is 480 by 360, so we're going to use this and keep the entire size in mind when creating the elements of our level. So I'm going to make it 480 by 360. As for the DPI, if you're making an image to be shown on a computer screen, 72 DPI is fine. If this was an image you were going to be printing, you'd want it to be 300 DPI so that it would print in high resolution. For Scratch, I don't care about printing on my images, so 72 DPI is fine. And then finally, you get to choose what type of background you want. I like to choose transparent as my background, as it holds no data and I can add in a background myself later. So we're going to click Create. And now we have a 480 by 360 pixel photo with no background. So I'm going to do a demonstration of how to make a drawing in Photopea, and after we've learned how to use the program properly, I'm going to show you how you can create images specifically made for your game that will work in Scratch. So the first thing I'm going to explain is layers. Layers are so helpful as an artist because unlike on paper, where everything is on the same page, you can create every piece separately and work only with that piece. So to begin, you'll notice that we have one layer called background, and the little lock beside it means that it's locked. When a layer is locked, you can't accidentally click on it and change it. So if I try drawing when it's locked, it won't let me, and it'll let me know that the layer is locked. If you click this little lock button, it'll unlock or lock it. So for now, I'm going to leave this locked. It's important to know how this lock button works because it can save you from making mistakes like drawing on the wrong layer, which can be very annoying to fix. Layers help organize everything, and if you have a line art layer and a color layer, and you're drawing color on your line art, well, it isn't very fun to clean up. So the lock button prevents us from making a mistake like that. So now that it's unlocked, I'll try drawing on it again. And you'll notice this time it worked. However, I don't want to be drawing with red, so I'll show you where you can find your default color. So down here is your default colors. This is your foreground color, and this is your background color. Whatever you draw with will be used here. So if I click this, you'll notice that it can change. I don't want what I just drew, so you can go to Edit and Undo, or there's a couple other ways you can get rid of it as well. My favorite way is to press Ctrl-Z. It's a pretty quick shortcut and it's used in Photoshop as well. Another thing you can do is use the eraser tool to erase little parts of your drawing. So first, we're going to create a background. If you just want to work with images that you find online, that's fine. Or you can make them yourself. Keep in mind that if you're using pre-made images that you didn't make yourself, you can't make money off your game because you're breaking copyright. So if you ever want to make games that you want to sell, make sure that you've created the images yourself. For a game like this though, where you don't make money off of it and you're just learning, it's fine. So to demonstrate, I've saved a background that we're going to use, but I'm going to draw my own character. So I'm going to click and drag in my background, which I already have saved. And it'll appear in my image. You'll notice that my photo isn't big enough. There's a bunch of little squares around this image. This allows for resizing or for rotating. If you accidentally click off your image, if you want to work with it again, just click the Move tool at the top and it should be selectable again. So I'm going to click and drag these little squares so that this fits, and then I'm going to press Enter. I'll also note that if I try to draw on my background, it'll tell me that I can't because it needs to be rasterized. What that means is it'll convert it into usable pixels so that you can do whatever you want on it. You can draw on it, you can erase it, etc. You can see the tiny little box in the bottom right here. There's a tiny little box. That means that the image is rasterized. And in order to work with it, you need to unrasterize it first. However, I'd recommend if you have a file that needs to be rasterized, make sure to resize it to the correct size that you want first before you rasterize it, because it'll lose content if it's too small and then you rasterize it. So this is the correct size that I want. So I'm going to click OK to rasterize it. And now if I try to draw on it, I can do that. So now you'll notice that it created a new layer. So the bottom layer is always behind everything else. So if I drew something on the background, you can't see it because this is on top of it. I'll just erase that. I want this to be my background, so I'm going to drag it below the other layer. And now this one is on top. So now we have two layers named background, but that's confusing. So what you can do is rename your layers to something that you're going to understand. Otherwise, your work can get messy and hard to understand. So to do that, I'm going to double click on the names and then rename them. I'm going to rename this top layer to Sketch. And this is where I'm going to make the rough sketch of my sprites. Now, I don't want my background to change and I don't want to accidentally draw on it. So I'm going to lock it so that I don't accidentally draw on it. And again, now I can't draw on it. So every time you finish something or aren't working on something, you should be locking it so you don't accidentally draw on it. So the first thing we're going to learn is the brush icon, because that's how we'll be drawing. So first I'm going to select the layer that I want to draw on, which is Sketch. And when you draw, you'll see it appears on top of my background. And if I click the eye on Sketch, you'll notice that it hides it, but it's still there. This is really handy for if you temporarily need to hide something, or if you want to keep that layer, but not to delete it, like my sketch layer. You can also change the transparency of your layers. So up here we have the opacity, and if I change it, you'll see that it kind of has some transparency to it, depending on what it is. This is really handy for if you're trying to adjust how intense your shadows or highlights are, or even if you want to create a ghostly effect. So now I'm going to show you the adjustment layers, and there's a bunch of them to choose from. So there's a ton of just one second. So there's a ton of adjustment layers to change how the computer will show this layer. They're really fun, and you can create some really cool effects. So I'd like you to play around with them if you like. You can just press down to cycle through to see the different types of adjustment layers and how they affect. For my sketch though, I'm just going to keep it on normal. Now this is a pretty bad sketch, so I'm just going to erase it. I'm going to click the eraser tool and use it to erase what I drew. You'll notice that my eraser is pretty small, and I want this to go faster. So you can press the square brackets on your keyboard to make the eraser bigger or smaller. Or at the top here, you can adjust the size manually. And another thing I'm going to show you is that you can change how strong the eraser is by changing the opacity of the eraser. So this is a good way to add a fade effect. I want my drawing completely deleted, however, so I'm going to put it back to 100. You can also change the brush type, and everyone has a different personal preference as to what type of brushes they like to use, so be sure to experiment with what type of brushes that you like using. If you're using a program like Photoshop, some people like to download or create their own brushes, but since we're using Photopea, we're sticking with what we've got. Okay, so now I'm going back to my sketch. And I'm going to click my brush icon again so I can draw. I want my brush to be black, so that I'm going to click on the color selector. So this is the color picker, and on your right you have your hue, which is the color you want to choose from. And on the left, you can choose how saturated or how light your color is. So the lighter your color is going to be, the higher your selection will be. And the darker it is, the lower it'll be. The more saturated or bright your color is, it goes from left to right. So the more saturated would be to the right, and the less saturated would be to the left. Generally, cartoons tend to be more bright and saturated, and real life tends to be less so. So the lightness or darkness of your color should be based on the lighting of your background. In this case, I'm just going to choose black, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to click OK. My brush is still a little big, so I'm going to change it to 3. And you can draw with a mouse or a tablet. In this case, I'm going to use a tablet. This image is pretty small to draw on, so we're going to zoom in to make it easier. To zoom in, there's a little magnifying glass button. So if I'm going to click that, I can click and drag with my left mouse button, and that can change that. Or you can hold Control and Alt and use your middle mouse button. And that's a shortcut. So this is a size that I'm okay with working with. So when you're drawing, you want to look at reference images. You don't necessarily want to trace them, but you need to use them so that you understand how something should look. The more reference images, the better. So I've already saved a reference image of a cat. So I'm going to drag it in. And you'll notice that it's created a new layer. So again, I clicked off and I want it resizable. So I'm going to click on Move Tool and I'm going to start resizing it. If you don't want the image to stretch, hold Shift and it will keep the same. It will keep the same ratio. I'm just going to put him up top here. And I want him to be facing this way. So now I'm going to add in another reference that I have saved. And I'm going to drag it in. And again, hold Shift and resize. And I'm keeping them in my image, but out of the way so that I can still draw. So now I'm going to lock my reference layers and I'm going to choose my sketch layer. So now that I've got a little bit of it set up, I'm going to save my image as a PSD file for now. So I'll go to File, Save as PSD. So this save file will not work in your Twine game, but it will save all of your layers and your progress so that you can take a break and come back to it later if you need to. You want to save it as a PSD file. Otherwise, everything will be flattened and you won't be able to work on separate pieces anymore. And if you want to open this up again later, you just go to File, Open, and then to wherever you saved it on your desktop. So now I'm going to quickly sketch a block that's the size that I want my paddles to be. So I roughly want them to be, if I hold Shift, it'll do straight lines. I want them roughly to be this big. I'm going to lower the opacity. And then I'm going to copy it. This is a selection tool. Control C, Control V. And now you'll notice I have a copy right on top. And again, I'm going to hold Shift and drag to the other side. And this is generally where I would want my other one to be. And I'll lower the opacity on this one as well. Because I just want these to be the sketch of where I want them to be, I'm going to hold Shift, select them both, and I'm going to merge the layers so that they become one layer. And then I'm going to rename this sketch. So now you'll notice that they're one layer. So when it comes to drawing, I want to bring up a feature. And that's the Smooth tool. If you have a little bit of trouble with shaky lines, what the Smooth tool will do is it'll automatically make them smoother for you. So you can adjust the amount of smooth that it has, and generally that can help a lot with drawing lines. Now it's going to be a little hard to see what I'm drawing, so I'm going to lighten my background temporarily. I'm going to create a new layer behind the background. So down here is the new layer tool. Drag it behind the background. I'm just going to hide this for a second. And then in here, if you hold and click, we can choose the paint bucket tool. And basically this will fill it with just an entire color. So I want it to fill with white. Now I will bring the background back and I'll lower the opacity. Oh, I gotta select the background. So this way I can kind of see my background while I'm drawing, and that kind of gives me an idea of what it'll look like. I'm going to lock these layers, and remember this is only temporary, so I can see what I'm doing with the background underneath. So for now, I'm going to lock my sketch layer, create a new layer, and this is where I'm going to put my cat line art. So because this image is a little bit small, I did the line art in advance, and I did it at a larger I drew it on a larger resolution, so you'll see that it's actually bigger than the thing. So I'm just going to bring this in, and I want him to be roughly the size of my pong paddle. And again, I drew the dog line art just to save time. And I also want him to be roughly the size of the pong paddle. Get rid of this because I don't need it. So now I don't need my sketch and I can hide it. So now I'm going to want to start to add color, the base color for my cat. So I'm going to create a new layer, again down here, double click, and I'm going to rename it cat base color. And I've decided I want to make my cat gray. I find it's easier to color without smooth on, so I'm just going to turn that down. And then hold Control-Alt to zoom in. And now I'm going to choose a nice little gray color for my cat. I'm going to lock my line art so I don't accidentally draw on it. And now I'm going to color in the cat. Now I'm going to lock this layer, and I'm going to create a new layer called dog base color. And this time I want the dog to be the same color as this dog. So over here we have an eyedropper tool, and what this will do is it'll sample a color. So if I click this, you'll notice that it's changed to the same color as the dog. So I'm going to click back, and I'm going to color in the dog with this color. So now that I've got my base colors in, I want to start matching the colors to the background. I want to add shadow, I want to add highlights. So I'm going to turn up my opacity back up on my background. And although my image doesn't have a light source, I want you to figure out where your light source would be coming from if you have a background that does, and what type of color it is. I'm going to say that my light source is coming in from the right. So I'm going to lock my dog base color. And now I'm going to add shadows and highlights for my cat. So again, go to New Layer, Cat Shadows, Highlights. Hold Control and Alt to zoom in. Figure out what gray he was. And now I'm going to choose a dark color for my cat. And since my light is coming in, oops, I'll re-choose that gray. Since my light is coming in from this way, the shadows would be on this side. Oh, I'm going to put this under my cat line art so that it doesn't draw on top. And I'm just going to add some basic shadows. And then I'm going to choose a lighter color for the highlights. And this is where the light would be hitting, so I'm going to make the light hit him on this side. Give him little cheeks. And now I'm going to do the same thing with my dog. So I'm going to lock this under the dog line art, dog shadows, highlights, zoom in on the dog. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to figure out what color he is. I'm going to choose a little bit of a darker color. And again, since the sun is coming from this way, the shadows will be on this side. So I'm going to color in some shadows. Give him a little cheek. And then I'm going to find a lighter color to do his highlights with. And then to lock. So now I'm going to hide my reference images, so clicking on the eyes, because I don't need them anymore. And I have both my characters, but I still need to make a ball and I still need to make the goals. So I'm going to create the ball and goals quickly. First, I'm going to create a new layer called Ball. And this time we're going to use a shape. So down here is the shapes, and if you hold, I'm going to find an ellipse, hold Shift, and I'm going to say it's going to be about yay big. And I don't exactly want my ball to be red, so up at the top you can change the fill color. And I'm just going to choose this gradient. And now I'm going to need to make my goal left and my goal right. So I'm going to make two new layers, goal left and goal right. Going to lock my ball. And so these are what the ball has to register, or it has to hit in order to register a goal. So I'm going to make sure that they're behind my animals. Make sure that they reach the top and the bottom. And again, you can hold shift to get a straight line. So I'm just drawing a single line. But I'd recommend you get a little bit more creative if you want. You don't necessarily just have to draw a line for the goal. And now I'm going to quickly go over some of the other buttons that we haven't touched. So over here, we have this move tool, and this allows you to select and move something. So beneath that is the selection box, and if you select something, only the things you do within the box will be selected. So I'll demonstrate that using the background. And you'll notice that even though I'm drawing all over the place, it only happens within the selection box. And then there's the lasso, and this works a lot like the selection box, except you get to choose the shape that you draw. And beneath that are some automatic selection tools. And remember that your selection will only work on whatever is the layer you have selected. So if I tried it on this layer, it tries to find selections, and then you can increase the tolerance to make it more or less grabby. So you can see now it's trying to pick everything that's green. So this can be really handy if you want to do quick selections. Beneath this is the crop feature, and this is if you only want to keep part of the size of your photo. So you would make your selection. Say I chose the cat. And then I would click confirm, and then it would crop your photo. I don't want this, so I'm just going to click Control Z. And then there's the eyedropper that we went over, and that chooses colors within your photo, and you'll notice that they're changing here. And then there's the healing selection tool. And I usually only use this with photographs, so I'm going to skip it, but it basically heals a small section of your photo, and it tries to auto-generate something that looks like it. I usually use this tool when I want to remove something from a photograph or touch up scratches. You just make your selection, and then you click Heal Selection at the top. Beneath that is the brush tool that we've been learning to draw with. And below that is the stamp tool. And it can copy parts of your image to another part. So I'll demonstrate using the background. You hold Alt to select the part of your image that you want to copy. So you can see the little cross here. Click. And then it remembers it, and you can copy it over to another part of the image. Below that is the eraser that you can use to erase different parts of your drawing. And then of course there's the paint bucket, which paints a selection a solid color, or you can choose a gradient that goes between two colors, and depending on how you drag, shows where the color comes from. Beneath this is the blur tool, and this allows you to blur parts of your image. And then there's the dodge tool. This allows you to lighten your image. And underneath that is the burn tool, and this darkens parts of your image. You can technically use this to create highlights and shadows, but I find it a lot easier to just use layers. But this is a quick way to change the lightness and darkness if you don't want to swap layers. Then you have the text tool. And this allows you to add text to your image. You can change the font, but I find it's a little bit laggy. It may or may not work for you. You can change the size, you can change the color. And then there's the pen tool, and this allows you to draw very clean lines. And then beneath that is the Path Select and Direct Select tool, which will allow you to change the things that you did with your pen. And then there's the shape that we went over that allows you to make perfect shapes. And this is a really good way to do things, especially if you have trouble drawing circles. With the hand tool, if you click, you can rotate if you're having trouble drawing in a specific angle. And then finally, we have the zoom tool that we went over. Hold the left mouse button and drag. Or again, hold Control and Alt, and middle mouse button. So now we're going to save this project file as the PSD again, just to make sure that I have it. And now we're going to need to export each element separately for Scratch. So first I'm going to hide everything except the background. I'm going to go to File, Export As, and I'm going to choose PNG. Make sure my quality is 100% and then save. So the reason we're choosing PNG, I'll name this background. The reason we're using PNG is because it keeps the transparency behind our characters. If we don't do that, there'll be a background behind it and it'll look kind of blocky in the game. So now we need to get each element separately. So now I'm going to hide everything except for everything related to my cat. I'm going to select all 3 cat layers, holding Shift and clicking. Right click, merge my layers. And I'm going to do the same with my dog. Merge layers. We'll do that when these are not hidden. There we go. So now our cat is 1 layer, and I'm going to right click and go duplicate into. I'm going to choose new project, OK. There we go, sorry, new project, cat, I'll just name him cat. Okay, and then you'll notice that he appears at the top here, and our old project is here. So now that we have the cat, we want to crop him. So I'm going to go up to the top and choose Image, Trim, and it'll automatically crop our cat for us. And now I'm going to export this as a PNG, 100% quality, save, and I'm going to save this as Pong Cat. And now back to my old project, hide my cat, get my dog, and then the same thing. Right click, duplicate into, new project, dog. Okay, he'll appear up at the top. Image, trim, and he's automatically trimmed. File, export as PNG, save. I'm going to name him Pong Dog. Back to my new project. And now I'm going to do the same with the last ones. So I've got my ball, duplicate into new project, appears at the top, trim, export as PNG, Pong ball, back to my project, and then I'm going to do the same with goal left and goal right. Duplicate into new project, trim, export as PNG, goal left, image, trim, export as PNG, and goal right. So now I have everything separate. Now before I move on, I'm going to say that you don't necessarily have to make everything yourself. So if you don't want to make things yourself and you want to use pre-existing images, what you can do is choose your image, rasterize, and then just delete around the edges. And then potentially you could use something like this inside of your game instead. If you're running low on time, this is a fast way to make images. And then of course you would do it the same way as the other things. You would take your image, duplicate into new project, trim, and then you'd save it out. So now I've created all of my images, we're going to learn how to add our images in Scratch. So first we're going to find the image that we want to replace, and I'm going to start with my player paddle. So under the Costumes tab, hover over the Add button and choose Upload Costume. So I'm going to choose Pong Cat. I'm going to delete Pong Paddle. And then under Opponent, I'm going to do the same thing. Choose a costume, upload. I'm going to choose my dog. Get rid of the old one. So now that all my sprites are in, we're going to go into the stage backdrops, which is at the bottom right here. Click this, and we're going to change the background. So again, hover over the Add button, go to Upload Backdrop, and then choose your background. And now if I test, make sure to delete the old one first. Now if I test, my graphics are now in my game. Okay, so now we've got our own graphics in Scratch, and we're on to the work period for today. I want you to get creative and think about what you want as a background and what type of sprites you want in your game. You can make your paddles look like anything, your ball could be anything. I didn't make my own background, but you could definitely make your own. You can choose between making your own images, or you can find ones online. So just try to make your game unique and have a lot of fun with it. Tomorrow we're going to go over how to add custom music and sound into your game in Scratch. So I'll be taking questions for the next hour if you need any help, and I'll see you soon.